In April 2025, China's Central Statistics Bureau stopped publishing data on youth unemployment, land sales, foreign investment, and even soy sauce production. Yes, soy sauce. No explanation. No notice. Just silence. At the same time, over 40 million posts were erased from Weibo. 2,000 journalist accounts were locked or banned. Videos showing protests, factory shutdowns, and police clashes in Guangdong disappeared within hours. Yet, the official GDP remains on track. The state media calls the economy resilient. But in the real world, China's manufacturing PMI plunged to 49.0, the lowest since 2023. Evergrande was forced into liquidation abroad. Country Garden is still restructuring billions in debt. And millions of workers? Gone from the narrative. When a government stops reporting its own numbers, it's not because things are going well. It's because the numbers are now too dangerous to admit. This is not just about statistics. This is about control. The question is no longer, what's happening in China? The question is, why is China hiding it? In early 2025, Washington turned up the pressure. Tariffs came back. Harder, sharper, broader. Over 90% of Chinese imports were hit. Some with rates as high as 145%. The de minimis loophole gone. Shein, Temu, and Amazon sellers lost their tax-free pass. Prices jumped. Orders dropped. Factories in China started shutting down. April 2025. China's manufacturing PMI dropped to 49.0. That means contraction. That means pain. It wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was jobs. Thousands lost work. Mostly young. Mostly low-skilled. Youth unemployment rose above 21%. Then something strange happened. Beijing stopped publishing the data. No explanation. No correction. Just silence. Next, housing numbers vanished. Evergrande was liquidated overseas. Country Garden defaulted. Hundreds of unfinished apartment blocks stood empty. Buyers vanished. Developers stalled. Mortgage defaults spiked. Local banks panicked. Again, no more official updates. China stopped reporting. Why? Because the truth was no longer manageable. Tariffs had crushed export profits. Factories laid off workers. Young people couldn't find jobs. Families cut back spending. Home prices fell. Land sales stopped. And suddenly, local governments ran out of money. The chain was broken. Each link triggered the next. At the end of that chain, the narrative collapsed. Beijing lost the ability to control the story. In the United States, bad data sparks debate. In China, bad data is erased. They didn't revise the numbers. They erased the scoreboard. Youth joblessness? No record. Home sales? No update. Factory output? Only partial figures. Even soy sauce production stats were pulled. Not because soy sauce matters, but because the whole system fears the signal. In 2025, China stopped acting like a country managing a downturn. It started behaving like a regime in damage control. Instead of fixing problems, it silenced them. Over 40 million posts were deleted from Weibo. Thousands of journalist accounts were locked. Protest footage vanished. News about strikes was scrubbed. Photos of factory shutdowns disappeared. And yet, on TV, China looked fine. State media said the economy was resilient, that growth was on target. But real GDP forecasts told a different story. Goldman Sachs, UBS, and IMF all slashed projections. China's 2025 growth is now pegged at just 3.5%. The government still claims 5%. But no one believes it anymore. Foreign investors are leaving. Suppliers are rerouting. Western analysts, flying blind. The illusion is over. For years, the world believed China had everything under control. A strong plan, a unified system, a backup for every crisis. But 2025 proved the opposite. China wasn't prepared. Not for tariffs. Not for youth unemployment. Not for real estate collapse. And certainly not for transparency. The truth? The numbers didn't collapse the system. The system collapsed the numbers. For decades, China built its power on one core advantage: numbers. Big numbers, fast growth, massive exports, and the world bought in. Investors, analysts, governments, they trusted what China reported, even when the numbers didn't quite add up, because the story was just too big to question. But in 2025, the story cracked. Let's start with a simple question. Why would a major economy stop reporting unemployment data? Because the unemployment is no longer manageable, and the truth is no longer survivable. Youth joblessness is estimated at over 21%. That's 1 in 5. Some experts say it's even higher. The government's solution? Stop counting. Next, housing. Evergrande is liquidated. Country Garden is in debt restructuring. Local governments depend on land sales to survive. But land auctions have stalled. Property sales are drying up. What does Beijing do? They pull the data. Now add manufacturing. PMI fell to 49.0 in April 2025. That's contraction. Factories are idle. Export orders are vanishing. That should be a national alarm. Instead, it's a national secret. Even soy sauce production numbers were pulled. Not because soy sauce is critical, but because anything can now be politically dangerous. This is a pattern, not an accident, not a glitch. It's a strategy of silence. And the goal? Protect the party. Shield the illusion. The Communist Party's legitimacy depends on two things: growth and control. If growth falters, they tighten control. If control slips, they erase the signals. So the data dies first. More than 40 million social media posts were deleted in Q1 2025. Thousands of journalist accounts shut down. Not just criticism, not just protests, but charts, photos, reports, anything that shows what's really happening. Meanwhile, state TV celebrates resilience. They say the numbers are being modernized. They call the economy stable. But if it's so stable, why hide it? Here's what's really happening. Beijing has turned the economy into a black box. One that only speaks when it's convenient. One that stays silent when reality gets too loud. This is not how functioning economies behave. Not Germany, not Japan, not even Russia. Only regimes afraid of collapse choose censorship over data. And here's the deeper problem. When China cuts off its own data, global investors go blind. Supply chain planners lose visibility. Allies lose trust. Markets lose confidence. The lie was simple: that China could slow down without falling apart. That it could hide cracks without losing structure. But the silence proves otherwise. When numbers vanish, it's not the system protecting itself. It's the system cracking from the inside. No more metrics. No more questions. Just a government staring into its own shadow. This wasn't a trade dispute. It was a pressure test. And China failed it. Many believe tariffs were about leverage. About getting China back to the table. About fair play in trade. That was only half the story. The real move wasn't negotiation. It was disruption. A deliberate strategy to expose how fragile China's internal system had become. Trump's administration knew something the markets ignored. China's growth was no longer organic. It was curated, managed, fragile. The tariffs didn't just hit goods. They hit the storyline, the image of an unstoppable economic machine. And Beijing's reaction proved the point. Instead of adapting, China chose to hide. Instead of confronting data, they erased it. That wasn't strength. That was signal. A signal to Washington. A signal to Wall Street. A signal to every supply chain planner in the world. The Chinese system doesn't bend, it conceals. And that's where the US strategy flipped. By closing the de minimis loophole, the US didn't just tax low-value goods. It disabled a backdoor China had exploited for years. By raising tariffs up to 145%, the US didn't just hurt profits. It suffocated export reliability. And as a result, China lost something more dangerous than market access. It lost predictability. Now, the world watches as China spirals deeper into its own information blackout. No land sale data, no job numbers, no consumer indexes, Just sanitized headlines and state TV slogans. This was the real twist. The US didn't have to win a negotiation. It only had to force China into self-isolation. When Beijing chose opacity over openness, it confirmed the deeper weakness. Not economic, institutional. The West didn't expect perfection. It expected signals. Signals that tell you where things are headed, where to invest, when to pull back. Without those signals, trust collapses. And once trust goes, capital follows. That's the strategic chokehold. China wants foreign investment but hides risk. Wants global markets but suppresses data. Wants influence but refuses transparency. You can't build a global power on a foundation of silence. And Washington knows this. By triggering a data retreat, US trade policy did what no sanction could. It made China unreadable. And unreadable means uninvestable. Even Chinese officials are starting to acknowledge it quietly. Behind closed doors, they've floated removing tariffs on key US goods. Pharmaceuticals, chips, aircraft components. Not as a deal, but as a gesture. A silent admission, we need this more than you do. But the damage is already done. China thought the world depended on its factories. But in 2025, it turns out those factories depend on trust. And trust doesn't survive in the dark. It starts with one policy. Tariffs go up. Margins collapse. Orders disappear. Factories in Shenzhen, Dongguan, Suzhou go dark. One worker gets laid off. Then 10. Then 1,000. Entire floors sit idle. Assembly lines are cold. Local suppliers lose contracts. Toolmakers shut down. Packaging firms vanish overnight. Young people go home. Degrees in hand. No job waiting. They apply online. No reply. They stand in job fair lines for hours, only to see positions filled, signs taped to booths. Some don't even make it to interviews, because the company folded last week. Youth unemployment crosses 21%. Unofficial estimates say higher, but no one dares publish. At home, parents start cutting costs. No vacations. No big purchases. Restaurants go empty. E-commerce slows. And then housing. No jobs mean no buyers. No buyers mean no demand. Developers run out of cash. Construction stops mid-project. Skeleton towers rise above neighborhoods empty, unfinished, unwanted. Mortgages go unpaid. Banks panic. Buyers protest. Some stop paying altogether. Country Gardens debts balloon. Evergrande gets liquidated abroad. Confidence vanishes. And here's where the damage spreads. In China, local governments fund themselves through land sales. Land sales depend on developers. Developers depend on homebuyers. When that stops, so does the money. No revenue. No public services. Teachers unpaid. Transit delayed. Hospitals understaffed. To hide it, cities pull down numbers. No updates on land auctions. No data on mortgage defaults. No mention of local debt. And still, the narrative must hold. So state media says all is stable. But inside local offices, panic spreads. Officials issue vague reports. Budgets get cut. Behind closed doors, they ask for bailouts. Beijing hesitates, because the real budget problem isn't local. It's structural. When the foundation cracks, the rest can't hold. Now it's censorship. Workers post about layoffs. Their videos vanish. Protesters get arrested. Whistleblowers disappear. And the rest of the population learns one thing. If the truth hurts the party, the truth is forbidden. This is how the dominoes fall. From tariff to layoff. From layoff to silence. From silence to collapse. But the worst is not the job losses. Or the bankruptcies. It's that no one is allowed to say, this is happening. And when a nation loses that right, it loses everything. The cracks spread beyond the economy. They hit the people. Then the society. Then the system. A laid-off worker doesn't just lose income. He loses identity. He stops spending. He stops planning. A college graduate gives up job hunting. She stays home. Her parents tell her to wait. Hope turns into doubt. Fewer weddings. Fewer babies. China's birth rate hits a 70-year low. People stop buying homes. Not just because they're unaffordable, but because they no longer believe in tomorrow. The middle class shrinks. Savings dry up. Inland cities, once promised prosperity, begin to hollow out. Buses run half-empty. Shops close early. Nighttime is silent. Now zoom out. The protests start small. Teachers unpaid. Civil servants delayed. Then larger. Construction workers demand wages. Retirees rally against pension cuts. By Q2 2025, protests have risen 41% compared to the year before. Most are erased from social media within hours. But the pattern is clear. Discontent is growing. The party responds the only way it knows how. With force. With silence. Journalists are arrested. Content is filtered. VPNs blocked. Not just to hide unrest, but to block the world from seeing it. Foreign investors take notice. But they don't file complaints. They leave. FDI falls by double digits. Capital flight accelerates. Tech firms cancel expansion. Global companies reroute supply chains. Vietnam, India, Mexico, they start to look safer, cleaner, predictable. Apple shifts more iPhone production out of China. Intel delays new fab investments. Trust is gone. And without trust, China is not the world's factory. It's a risk zone. Meanwhile, Beijing keeps the mask on. Speeches repeat slogans. Resilience. Self-reliance. Stability. But there are no metrics to support it. Because the metrics are gone. China has turned its economy into a black box. Even officials don't know what's real anymore. They rely on filtered data. On fear. On silence. The global impact deepens. Supply chains fracture. Markets react. Strategists downgrade exposure. But the biggest loss isn't economic. It's conceptual. For 2 decades, the world believed in China's rise. Now it's watching its retreat. Not with a crash, but with a quiet, careful, controlled erasure. Not with tanks, but with disappearing spreadsheets. What kind of superpower deletes its own reflection? This isn't just economic decline. It's institutional decay. The lights are still on, but no one can see inside. And that's more dangerous than any number. A nation that censors pain doesn't stop the pain. It only blinds itself to the wound. In 2025, China didn't just lose data. It lost direction. Unemployment isn't being fixed. It's being hidden. Debt isn't shrinking. It's vanishing off the books. And the people? They're not recovering. They're disappearing from the story. But the rest of the world is still watching. And what it sees now is a country afraid of its own reflection. You can shut off the indicators. You can shut down the voices. You can pull down the graphs. But you can't shut down consequence. When a system fears transparency more than collapse, it tells you what kind of collapse is already happening. China doesn't need an enemy to fall. It just needs another year of hiding itself. Because in the dark, even the strongest empire walks straight into the edge. So ask yourself, if they won't tell us what's happening inside, how far has it already gone?